Welcome back to Sip and Talk. Joe here.
Good to be back.
Hey, remember a few deep dives ago, we were sort of wrestling with all that stuff coming out of those U.S. congressional hearings. It was, a lot.
Oh, yeah. Definitely a lot to unpack. Covered everything from like tech regulations to big international security questions.
Exactly. And for anyone who maybe missed that one, we basically tried to sift through it all, pulled out the main things they were digging into, the big worries that kept coming up, and, what some of the ripple effects could be. Mm-hmm. It's worth checking out if you're curious about what's keeping folks in Washington busy these days.
Yeah, it gave a pretty good snapshot of the key strategic thinking being tossed around.
Right. So today, we're going to zero in on one of those really persistent and kind of thorny issues that seem to be like humming in the background of a lot of those talks. This feeling that maybe, just maybe, the world is trying to, prevent China from rising. And we've actually got some interesting bits from those same hearings that might help us unpack this whole picture.
Right. It's definitely a complicated issue. Lots of layers, historical, economic, strategic.
Totally. And we're going to try something.
Exactly. Weakening societal resilience, economic strength, military defenses, while at the same time boosting China's own global influence.
Okay, so it's kind of like a dual approach to build themselves up while maybe trying to bring others down a notch comparatively. That's a different way to think about it. What are the main ways they're doing this?
Well, one really visible area is the mix of military posturing and what people often call gray zone tactics.
Gray zone, okay.
We're seeing this ongoing expansion of their military might, air, sea, land, even cyberspace. And then, of course, there's the constant pressure on Taiwan.
Right.
That means things like those big military drills, missile tests, and those almost daily flights and ship movements near Taiwan.
Yeah, that constant presence.
Yeah.
It definitely feels like more than just routine patrols.
Yeah.
And wasn't there something about a time frame mentioned? A specific year?
Yes. Reports suggest Xi Jinping told the PLA, their army, to be ready by 2027. And some U.S. military folks have even warned a conflict could potentially happen sooner than that.
Wow. Okay. So they're not exactly being subtle about their intentions, it seems. Now, you mentioned gray zone tactics. What does that actually mean for someone not familiar?
Think of it like actions that are deliberately kept below the level of outright war. But they're still meant to coerce to destabilize.
Ah, okay. Like pushing boundaries without crossing the line into full combat.
Precisely. It could be sophisticated cyber attacks, spreading disinformation campaigns, maybe even threatening critical things like those undersea internet cables. For Taiwan, the goal seems to be to wear down their will to resist, to undermine their ability to function, all without necessarily launching a full-scale invasion.
So it's like this constant simmering pressure campaign designed to just grind them down over time. That sounds pretty worrying. What about the economic angle?
Right. Economic leverage and the potential for coercion. That's another major tool in their kit. Taiwan's economy is pretty tightly linked with the mainland's, right?
Yeah, very much so.
So there's this possibility China could use things like trade restrictions, pulling back investments, or even messing with crucial energy supplies like LNG to basically squeeze them politically.
That makes a lot of sense. Using economic interdependence as a weapon. We've seen variations of that before, haven't we?
We have. And the hearings also brought up the worry that China might combine cyber attacks with economic pressure to really hit Taiwan's economic stability hard.
It's like they're probing all the potential weak spots.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole information side of things, right? Trying to shape how people think, stir up trouble.
Oh, absolutely. Information and psychological warfare are seen as a huge ongoing challenge. The CCP is reportedly using all sorts of tools, signal towers, media companies they've bought up, those networks of fake accounts or bot farms.
Right, to bots.
And now increasingly sophisticated AI, like generative AI, to push out disinformation, create splits in Taiwanese society, and basically erode trust in their government and their democracy.
Man, it's like trying to navigate a hall of mirrors. Makes it incredibly hard to know what's real or who to trust.
Exactly. The apparent goal is to kind of weaken their social fabric, maybe even paralyze their democratic system from the inside out. And then, moving to the global stage, China is also working hard to isolate Taiwan internationally.
How are they managing that?
Well, by systematically blocking Taiwan from joining major international groups, like the WHO, for example, and by leaning on other countries, using diplomatic pressure, to get them to cut official ties with Taipei, or at least downgrade them. Plus, they use their economic clout offering deals or threatening consequences to get countries to support their position on Taiwan, or at least stay quiet about it.
So it's basically, if you want access to our market, you need to toe our line on this.
Yeah.
That definitely puts countries in a tough position. And then there's the whole Russia connection.
Yes, that's a big one. The growing military cooperation between China and Russia is a really significant development. There's talk of Russia potentially giving China advanced tech, like hypersonic weapons or maybe quieter submarine technology. And when they do joint military drills and patrols out there in the Western Pacific, it definitely complicates things strategically for the U.S. and its allies, creates new headaches.
It really does feel like they're trying to present a more united front, maybe push back against U.S. influence together.
Yeah.
So, okay, when we kind of step back and look at all these pieces, the military stuff, the gray zone, the economy, info-war, diplomacy, Russia, what's the big picture? What are the main goals behind all this activity?
According to the testimony and analysis from the hearings, the objectives of what they're calling China's malign influence seem to break down into a few key areas. The first big one seems to be weakening Taiwan's societal resilience.
Okay, resilience. How so?
It's about undermining the Taiwanese people's will to resist any push for unification. It's about making their own democratic system seem less legitimate, less effective in their own eyes. It was even mentioned that Taiwan's President Lai has set up a specific task force just to deal with these kinds of threats.
So really targeting their internal strength, their resolve.
Got it. And the second major goal is pushing back against the U.S., right?
Exactly. China seems to view the United States as the main obstacle to its global ambitions. So a key goal is to reduce U.S. influence, especially in the Indo-Pacific, and to try and drive wedges into the U.S. alliance system.
Wow.
Through that mix of military pressure, economic carrots and sticks, and diplomatic maneuvering. And those reports about malware potentially hidden in U.S. critical infrastructure, ready to disrupt things in a crisis, that really underlines how seriously they take this objective.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought, the potential for disruption to basic services. And the third main goal, obviously, is focused squarely on Taiwan itself.
Yes, the idea of maintaining what they see as national sovereignty and territorial integrity is absolutely central. From Beijing's perspective, Taiwan is part of China. Full stop.
Right.
So the ultimate aim is to prevent Taiwan from ever declaring formal independence and eventually achieve unification. Preferably peacefully, they'd say, but they haven't ruled out force. Okay, so that gives us a clearer view of the what and the how. Now, let's try and tackle that really interesting and maybe the hardest part, the why from their point of view. Why does the CCP seem to genuinely believe they're justified? Why do they paint others as the ones obstructing their, quote, legitimate rise? It means trying to see it through their lens for a minute, even if we strongly disagree.
Well, this is where their official narrative becomes really, really important. A core part of it is intense nationalism, tied up with their particular reading of history.
Okay.
The CCP positions itself as the leader of this great national rejuvenation. They argue China's return to global prominence isn't just something they want, it's like historical destiny.
Like they're correcting a historical wrong almost.
That's a big part of it. While the hearings didn't go super deep into China's historical narratives, it's pretty clear they lean heavily on the century of humiliation story, that period of foreign domination and unequal treaties in the 19th and early 20th centuries. So they frame their current actions as setting things right, reclaiming their proper place. And from that perspective, any outside interference like U.S. support for Taiwan is seen as actively blocking this necessary historical correction.
So from their angle, supporting Taiwan isn't about democracy, it's about keeping China down.
That's a fundamentally different framing. And then there's that absolute focus on sovereignty.
Absolutely non-negotiable for them.
Right.
Taiwan is considered part of China, period. So any support for Taiwanese independence, or even for a level of autonomy that Beijing doesn't approve of, is seen as a direct attack on their sovereignty. So while much of the world sees the threat to Taiwan as about self-determination, about freedom, the CCP frames its actions, even potential force, as a perfectly legitimate defense of national unity.
It's a real clash of fundamental values, isn't it? And the last piece seems to be how they view the current world order, this idea of Western hegemony.
Exactly. They often portray the U.S. and its allies as forces deliberately trying to contain China to stop its natural rise.
They frame their own pushback, not as aggression, but as a just struggle against an unfair, Western-dominated system designed to keep them subordinate.
So they see themselves as the underdog fighting against a rigged system, in a way.
That seems to be the narrative. And the hearings did touch on some of China's strengths, like that huge shipbuilding capacity, way bigger than the U.S.'s.
Yeah, that number was staggering.
And their partnership with Russia is presented as a way to balance things out. So from their viewpoint, U.S. alliances and military presence in the region aren't about stability. They're obstacles deliberately placed in their path.
It really sounds like they're operating from a completely different set of assumptions, fueled by a narrative that, to them, makes perfect sense and justifies their actions. So let's maybe dig just a bit deeper into this. What's the sort of underlying strategic logic here? And what else shapes how they see themselves and their role?
Well, a key part of their strategic thinking seems to be embracing these asymmetrical and gray zone tactics. They likely recognize they might be behind the U.S. in some traditional military areas, right? So they lean into areas where they might have an edge or where the rules are less clear. Think sophisticated cyber warfare, massive disinformation campaigns, economic pressure, maybe hitting that undersea cable infrastructure we mentioned.
Right, exploit vulnerabilities instead of a direct fight everywhere.
Exactly. It's about gaining leverage where they can, often below the threshold of war. And this focus on psychological and cognitive warfare seems really central to their whole approach.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. How does that play out?
Well, controlling information, sowing division in other countries, undermining people's trust in their own governments and institutions, that seems to be a top priority. The goal might be to create this feeling that resistance is pointless, or that allies like the U.S. won't actually show up, weaken the will to resist, potentially leading to a kind of societal breakdown without needing a full military campaign. It's a battle for minds.
That's a pretty unsettling idea. Winning by making people give up hope. And it sounds like their economic power is also a very deliberate tool in this strategy.
Oh, definitely. Economic leverage is a major instrument for political influence. They use their huge market and dominance in certain key industries to pressure other nations, especially on sensitive topics like Taiwan.
Right.
It's a kind of non-military coercion, maybe a slower form of aggression, designed to isolate Taiwan and chip away at international support.
Using economic ties like a strategic lever, applied slowly but surely. And it feels like this isn't just a temporary plan, it's more of a long-term vision.
Precisely. The way they seem to systematically implement these strategies plan for the long haul. The malware reports, the tech exchanges with Russia, developing AI-driven weapons, it all suggests a really comprehensive, sustained push to reshape the global order to better suit their interests.
So looking back at those malign influence goals with this strategic logic in mind, what really jumps out?
Well, you see this very calculated effort to weaken democratic societies from within. They exploit the openness of democracies, the sometimes slower decision-making, using information warfare to stir up doubt about the U.S., create internal divisions, maybe fuel anti-government feelings. They also seem to be constantly testing Western reactions with these gray zone actions, sort of probing red lines, seeing what they can get away with.
Right, testing the waters.
And finally, by trying to build this image of China irreplaceable, controlling key supply chains, being indispensable economically, they aim to make other countries hesitant to really push back or decouple.
It all feels very woven together, very strategic. And when we circle back to why the CCP feels justified,
a lot of it seems anchored in that century of humiliation narrative, a real sense that the current world order is unfair, a holdover from Western dominance, and changing it is historical justice. Then there's the Marxist-Leninist ideology underpinning things, which, in their view, positions their system as historically inevitable, the next stage. So U.S. containment isn't just geopolitics. It's seen as a clash of systems, a clash of civilizations almost.
So they genuinely believe they're on the right side of history.
It certainly seems that way, and that's amplified by intense nationalism, the whole Chinese dream idea, creating this powerful sense of national pride and reinforcing the feeling that their actions are just. And Taiwan sits right at the center of this, embodying both their push for internal unity and their struggle against perceived external dominance.
It's a really complex mix. Historical grievance, ideology, national ambition, all feeding into the sense of justification.
Oh, okay. So switching gears slightly, the hearings also really drove home just how important Taiwan is globally and what could happen if things go wrong there.
Oh, absolutely. The U.S. commitment to Taiwan isn't just symbolic. It's deeply tied to U.S. economic and national security. I mean, Taiwan is the world leader in advanced semiconductors.
Yeah, those chips are crucial for everything: phones, computers, cars, but also advanced U.S. weapon systems. There's genuine bipartisan worry in the U.S. about being so reliant on Taiwan for those.
Right.
The hearings even threw out some stark numbers. Losing Taiwan's semiconductor supply could basically crash the U.S. economy, potentially wiping out trillions in global GDP. Even just a conflict in the region, never mind the outcome, could devastate the global economy.
Wow, those figures are just mind-boggling. It really hammers home that this isn't just some far-off regional dispute. It affects everyone.
Exactly. And beyond the economy, Taiwan is a functioning, vibrant democracy. The CCP's threats challenge that basic idea that people should get to choose their own future. Plus, Taiwan's a key strategic partner for the U.S. Stability in that whole area is vital for global trade, and its security is linked to the whole network of U.S. allies in the Indo-Pacific.
So it's like a crucial piece, a linchpin almost. If Taiwan's security is compromised, it could destabilize the entire region. Now, the hearings didn't just focus on China. They also pointed out some real challenges and vulnerabilities the U.S. itself is facing.
Yeah, that was an important part, too. While the U.S. is trying to strengthen military ties in the region, there's this worrying trend where public confidence in the U.S. among some allies seems to be slipping.
Really?
Yeah, like that Paul mentioned, where a significant chunk of Taiwanese respondents apparently said they didn't find the U.S. trustworthy anymore. That's a serious issue.
Yeah.
And there's this growing sense that maybe the U.S. isn't as prepared for this kind of intense, long-term competition as people thought, and that China is a much more formidable competitor than maybe previously acknowledged.
That's a sobering realization. Were there specific vulnerabilities they pointed to?
Several came up. The heavy U.S. dependence on China for critical minerals and rare earths essential for tech and defense. China apparently taking the lead in future warfare tech like drones and robotics. That huge gap in shipbuilding capacity we talked about. China's dominance over the whole solar energy supply chain.
So in some really critical areas, the U.S. is either dependent or falling behind. That doesn't sound ideal for strategic competition.
No, it doesn't. They also mentioned bureaucratic slowdowns within the U.S. hindering aid to Taiwan, internal U.S. policy debates that could accidentally help China, and even past U.S. trade policies that sometimes damage trust with allies.
It sounds like there's a need for the U.S. to kind of get its own house in order to effectively compete and support its partners.
Absolutely. Addressing those internal vulnerabilities, strengthening alliances, and boosting deterrence all seem critical moving forward. It's a multi-front challenge.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to digest. It's crystal clear this isn't just a simple case of, one country rising and others getting nervous. There's some really deep historical roots, complex politics, major economic factors all tangled up here.
Definitely. And trying that thought experiment, trying to see it, even briefly, from the CCP's viewpoint, even if we fundamentally disagree, it does shed some light on why they might act the way they do, why they might genuinely believe their narrative.
Yeah, it really highlights how starkly different these stories can be, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What one side calls defense, the other sees as aggression or containment. It just shows how easily these different views can ramp up tensions.
Understanding those competing narratives is so crucial for anyone trying to make sense of global politics right now.
This definitely gives you something to mull over. So what does this all mean for you listening? Well, getting a handle on these underlying motives, the strategies, the vulnerabilities on all sides, it's pretty essential for understanding the sheer complexity of what's happening globally and where things might be headed.
Yeah, hopefully this deep dive gives you a bit more context, a clearer lens to view these really critical global dynamics. Knowledge is power, right?
That's our take for today. If you found this deep dive thought-provoking, make sure you subscribe to the deep dive. That way you won't miss our future attempts to untangle these big, complex issues.
We try to bring clarity and different perspectives to help you stay informed.
And hey, completely random side note, our good friend Micky, you know Micky, he's been making some absolutely awesome original music lately. Put it up on his YouTube channel. Seriously, go check him out. Show him some love. He's really talented.
Always good to support creators.
Thanks so much for tuning in to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.